Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today's subject choice was community choice. This is where you guys pick the cars that go around the Top Gear track and then I throw them around and we see what sort of times we can get. We start up today with the Vauxhall Astra VXR. 276 horsepower, 3,252 pounds of weight. It has been a while since we last saw a bunch of hot hatches go around the Top Gear track. I was kind of curious to see what the Astra VXR could do. Now on paper, the VXR stats are pretty decent. 276 horsepower for a front wheel drive hot hatch, modern hot hatch anyway, is quite a bit. 3,252 pounds is about average for the class. However, the VXR, not the nicest car to drive, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know if it's just because I haven't driven hot hatches for a while, or whether this was actually a thing with the Astra VXR, but I was noticing an absolute cacton of understeer in this vehicle. It is very, very understeery, this car. Not as bad as the A45 AMG and some four-wheel drive cars we've had go around the track recently, but the VXR, it just didn't handle quite as nicely as I'd expect. As far as the speed goes, it wasn't too bad. I would say, straight line speed wise, this is about on par with the Golf R, I'd probably say. Probably one of the quicker hot hatches, but it just wasn't great when it came to its handling, and that sort of let the VXR down a little bit, but still wasn't too bad a vehicle to drive, and it was a little bit of fun. Similarly, we have the Vauxhall Astra 1.6 Techline now, which is the Astra but normal. 114 horsepower, 3,104 pounds. Surprisingly, this version is actually lighter than the VXR, which is a little bit strange. Anyways, most of you probably recognise this as the Top Gear car, and I was kind of curious to see what the sort of time this car would set, especially in comparison with the VXR Astra, because the VXR Astra is essentially the pumped up hot version of the Astra, and this is sort of a standard road car essentially. Sure, the Top Gear edition, I'm not too sure what it adds. I believe it's just racing seats and a roll cage, so this might actually be a little bit heavier than a standard Astra, but I don't think it adds any power or anything. As far as the Techline goes, this is actually a very nice car to drive. That might be partly due to the fact that it just has no speed whatsoever. You essentially brake, I believe, about 3 times throughout this entire track. You brake for the hammerhead, you brake for the second corner, you brake for the second to last corner. Everywhere else you just flat out in this car all the time. As you can see, it is fantastically slow in a straight line. It just has no speed whatsoever. I think coming through the follow through, he's doing about 80 miles per hour. I didn't ease off or anything, it was just full attack constantly. Yeah, your finger actually starts hurting with this car after a while because you've just got your finger over the trigger for so long in this car. It is not particularly quick, but it is a nice car to drive. I'm not sure, we drove one in the police car build a while back, or actually recently, and it was a pretty decent vehicle despite the engine change. So yeah, I don't know, the Techline was a nice handling car though, that's for sure. Next up we've got the BMW 850 CSI, 372 horsepower, 4,240 pounds of weight. This was one I was curious about, and I do have to say the 850 CSI, this is a very, very good car to drive actually. I didn't actually realise until I was doing the research and getting the stats for the vehicles after taking them around the track. I didn't realise it was this heavy. 4,240 pounds is an awful, awful lot. I mean, it's almost £1,000 heavier than anything else here today, but it just does not feel like it. I was very surprised when I found out it weighed that much. It felt like a £3,000 standard GT cruiser. But yeah, overall the 850 CSI, pretty decent car to drive. I do have to admit, after driving the some of the slower cars here today, this was a very, very welcome change to have something with a bit of power under the hood. 372 horsepower, second most powerful car here today. Yeah, the 850 CSI was pretty quick, as you can see. It has pop-up headlights, which means it's fantastic, although, admittedly, it's not the only car here today with pop-up fancy headlights, and I think the other car in this pack today has even fancier headlights than this. But nevertheless, the 850 CSI, very, very nice car to drive this. I did actually enjoy my time with the 850 CSI, and as I said, you just don't feel the weight in this vehicle, which is pretty surprising. Next up, we've got the Nissan Skyline 2000 GTR from 1971, 160 horsepower, 2,425 pounds of weight. This is, I believe, the first generation of GTR ever. And if we look at history at least, Skylines do very well around our track. The R34 and the R32 are up there with, in case of lap times. I believe the R33 has also been around here and set a pretty decent lap time. So the Skylines usually do very well around this track, and I've got to say the GTR was a pretty nice vehicle to drive. It is a little bit wallowy, as you can see, and it's not the quickest thing in a straight line. I mean, 160 horsepower for everything here today is perfectly fine, but it isn't particularly quick, but it does handle pretty decently. You know, once you take the sort of older suspension out of the count, it's a pretty nice car to drive, and as you can see through there, I took some serious speed through there. Tail did end up sliding out. I believe this vehicle, well actually I know this vehicle's rear wheel drive, which does mean you get a bit more sliding than you would do in a modern Skyline GTR, but at the same time still pretty decent vehicle to drive. And his lap times weren't too bad either, considering the age of this vehicle and sort of what it would be up against. You know, we're sort of thinking this vehicle's going to go around the Capri, maybe, somewhere like that. But yeah, you'll have to wait to the end for that one. But the Skyline GTR, pretty decent car to drive. I kind of liked it. I'm still not a huge fan of these older GTRs, but yeah, it's definitely better than the 73, I'll give it that. Next up, we got the Opel GT, 90 horsepower, 2,121 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful car here today. It's also the one with the least amount of weight. And this is the car that has the coolest headlights ever. Unfortunately, you can't see them pop up on this, which is boo. But essentially, they like roll around in the headlight casing. It's really, really awesome. I definitely suggest at least taking this thing into Forza Vista and turning the lights on and off. You'll really enjoy it. How is the Opel GT to drive though? Well, it's it's a decent amount of fun. I mean, yeah, it's a good amount of fun. It's nice to drive. It's very, very planted. However, this thing, as with the Techline, has no straight line speed whatsoever. There is no speed in this car at all. 90 horsepower is not a lot. I believe that's about what the GTI Rabbit had. I'm not too sure on that one. But yeah, this was not a quick car by any stretch of the imagination. However, if it had, I don't know, 50 more horsepower, I'd definitely say this vehicle would be pretty decent. But as it stands, there's just no way near enough straight line speed in the Opel GT to really make a difference. The Cadet had a lot more straight line speed than this did. Granted, I believe the Cadet might also be a bit more fun to drive than this. The Opel GT is a very, very nice car to drive. It's almost on par with the Cadet, but I think the Cadet was more fun, in my opinion. So I'd probably recommend the Opel Cadet over the Opel GT, but still, this isn't a bad car. Maybe you want to throw some upgrades on it and see what sort of car it becomes when upgraded, but there you go. Anyways, next up we got the Fiat Dino 2.4 Coupe, 180 horsepower, 3,080 pounds of weight. This is another car which surprised me with how heavy this was, actually, after I did the run. 3,086 pounds is the same as a Ferrari Enzo and a Renault Clio V6. For whatever reason, every car in Forza weighs 3,086 pounds for some reason. But anyway, the Dino. Driving the Dino, this was an awful lot like the Capri that went round last week. That's why it sort of surprised me when I saw the weight on this thing, because the Capri was actually quite a light car from what I remember. Yeah, 2,315 pounds in the Capri. It's down on horsepower by 30 horsepower, the Capri, but it's also 700 pounds lighter. But still, the Dino really held its own, and it really did drive like the Capri. 180 horsepower makes it actually relatively powerful for what we've got here today, but it's not a lot. This thing, maybe it could do, you know, 210 horsepower, this thing could be a lot better than it is, but it still wasn't too bad, and as far as cars go here today, straight line speed, it was fine. You know, I believe I drove this, when did I drive? I drove this straight after the Opel GT, I believe, and I was very much happy with the straight line speed of this vehicle compared to that GT. It has double the horsepower, for crying out loud. So yeah, Fiat Dino, nice car to drive. Although, to be fair, I was kind of expecting it. Looking at it, it just looks like kind of like a Jensen Interceptor, so I was expecting decent driving habits out of it. And finally today, we've got the Shelby Cobra, 427 S-C, 425 horsepower, 2,350 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful car here today, and it's also one of the lightest. 2,350 pounds is not a lot. I don't know how it weighs that little considering the engine in this thing. Anyways, the Shelby Cobra. Oh, this car drives exactly how I expect every single muscle car to drive. It has very nice straight line speed. It is by far and away the quickest thing in a straight line here today. However, the handling is atrocious. You can see it through these corners. The suspension wobbles about, the rear end just all it wants to do is kick out. You can't full throttle this thing on a straight, otherwise it will just throw you into a bush. The Shelby Cobra, it's a little bit too light for its own good, I feel. But still, again, the straight line speed's amazing, but it's even sliding through the follow through, which we don't usually see anymore. Yeah, this vehicle is very, very difficult to drive. Is it fun? Yes. Would it be good in a racing situation? Hell no. It would be awful to go racing in this vehicle if you didn't have any downforce or race tyres on it. Stock, this thing is terrifying to drive, but it's a little bit of fun, and I don't know why this hasn't been around the track before. Anyways, moving on to the times, and the Shelby Cobra was the fastest car of the day, with going into 101st place with a 123.215. It gets slotted in a very weird place though, between a Bowler and a Maserati Ghibli, which is strange. It's quicker than a Mustang and 2 Skylines though, which is pretty good. The 850 CSI goes into 131st with a 126.878, beating out a G-Class and a Plymouth Prowler. And the Vauxhall Astra VXR goes into 138th with a 127.826, beats out an Audi S1, but it is slower than its main rival, the Ford Focus ST, which is fair enough. The Focus ST was a nicer to drive vehicle. Coming down the board, the Fiat Dino goes into 175th with a 133.604, fractionally off of the Capri. That's how similar those cars are to drive. And in fact, the Skyline GTR isn't too far behind it either, going into 176 with a 134.122, which is pretty good. I mean, that beats out a old Miata, Lotus Elan, pretty good. And finally today, the Vauxhall Astra VXR, Vauxhall Astra 1.6 Techline, sorry, goes into 185th with a 141.450, and the Opel GT is a little bit behind it with a 141.693. Both slower than the Opel Kadett C, which is quite surprising. Also slower than a Cadillac Limo, but we'll forget that. It's faster than the S-Tech, that's all that matters. So yeah, that's a pretty interesting lineup of vehicles you guys gave me. You really seem to like your classic cars, don't you? Anyways, as for next week's theme, it's probably going to be older versus new, so yeah, be happy for that, expect that. I apologise, this was a little bit late. The single car episode will be going up tomorrow. Anyways, friends, I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you all very much for watching. My name's been The Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.